Hello to everyone at the Christian Communicators Conference. My name is Ash Pryor, and I am so honored to be with you all today to talk about my research into the impact of nonverbal communication and interpersonal relationship development. So, to kind of get us in the posture to talk about what we're going to be talking about today, I want you to think back and think about a time that someone told you, "I'm fine." And there was a check because even though you heard the words "I'm fine," everything about their tone of voice, maybe their facial expression and body language told you that they definitely were not fine. So we all experience moments like this in the ways that we talk because communication is about much more than the words we say. We are constantly interpreting facial expressions, eye contact, tone of voice, posture, gestures, and other behaviors to understand what someone actually means. I wanted to better understand how those nonverbal cues influence our abilities to communicate and, more importantly, how they impact the relationships we build with one another. So, hence the purpose of this study. So when we think about communication, we naturally think about words, but nonverbal communication includes everything. So from our facial expressions, our eye contact, the tone of voice that we're using, even how close we're standing to one another, these all combine into an experience of communication. So what's interesting is that these behaviors, they don't just add something extra to our words, but rather they reinforce what we're saying, contradict it, or sometimes communicate something entirely different on their own. So this is what got me curious about studying nonverbal behaviors, and not just the nonverbal expressions in and of themselves, but how understanding and even having an awareness of these nonverbal cues, how can they help us better communicate with one another? So that's what led to my primary research question. So how does an understanding and awareness of nonverbal communication influence interpersonal relationship development and communication effectiveness as a whole? That led me to my thesis, which is that a greater awareness of nonverbal communication contributes to a more effective communication style and even stronger interpersonal relationships. So essentially, if we're more aware of the signals we're sending and better able to recognize the signals that others are sending to us, then maybe we might be better equipped to understand one another, communicate more effectively, and even build more meaningful relationships. Existing research has given me a strong foundation. So Burgoon and Hale found that nonverbal behaviors communicate relational messages like trust, involvement, intimacy, and even affection. So Tickle-Diggin and Roslin connected nonverbal communication with rapport, particularly through attentiveness, positivity, and coordination. Research on emotional communication shows that facial expressions and vocal cues help us understand the other person's emotions as they're communicating, even if their communication is not emotional in and of themselves. But much of the research focuses on an individual's behaviors or specific professional behaviors in professional environments. I particularly wanted to look more at a broad scope of how people's awareness of nonverbal communication influences their day-to-day, and in turn how that influences their interactions in relationships. So to explore my research question, I used a quantitative cross-sectional survey, which I distributed through Google Forms. So 36 adults participated anonymously. They answered 10 Likert scale questions examining behaviors like eye contact, body language, facial expressions, gestures, tone of voice, and emotional expressions that were tied in with that. I also included 4 demographic questions and 1 open-ended question where participants were able to describe how nonverbal communication affects their day-to-day interactions. I then used descriptive statistics to identify patterns in the responses and reviewed the open-ended responses for some reoccurring themes, which we're going to explore later in this presentation. So before looking at the findings, it's important to understand who participated, who the audience was that this survey is describing. So most of the respondents were female, and more than half were between the ages of 25 and 34. So about 58% lived in suburban communities, and nearly 78% were fully employed. This becomes important when considering the limitations of my findings, because this is a relatively small sample size and not entirely representative of a specific demographic or even cultural group as well. So this is where the results became really interesting to me. So every participant agreed or strongly agreed when it came to awareness of other people's body language when they were communicating. So every participant also agreed that tone of voice affects how they interpret spoken words, and nearly 78% strongly agreed with that statement. Almost 95% said that they intentionally use facial expressions to show attentiveness, and the same percentage reported using nonverbal cues to communicate their own messages clearly. Finally, with 86.1%, they said that they were able to identify another person's emotions through nonverbal expressions. So we're not just noticing these behaviors in other people, but we're intentionally using them ourselves, and we're utilizing them to interpret the messages that are being given to us. And again, not exclusively through vocal messaging, through words, but also picking up on all the communication that is happening through the body as the person is communicating in front of us. So one result in particular that stood out to me was that 80.6% of participants agreed or strongly agreed that they make judgments about someone's personality based on their nonverbal behavior. This is particularly interesting to us as we're in Christian spaces, because a lot of our day-to-day happens in interacting with folks. So this could be our ministries, our small groups, if we're communicating as pastors to a large group of people. 80.6% of participants agreed or strongly agreed that they make judgments about someone's personality. So that is a lot of weight to put on someone based on a message they may or may not be aware that they are communicating. So this has practical implications for educators, nonprofit professionals, ministry leaders like yourselves, counselors, and organizational leaders. But I think it has particular significance for us as Christian communicators, because communication is relational. Whether we're leading a ministry or speaking to a congregation, working with donors or serving a community, leading volunteers, or simply sitting across from someone at a coffee shop who needs to be heard, how we show up really matters. Someone may hear us say that we care about them, but if we're looking at our phone or our watch, we're avoiding eye contact or appearing distracted, we may be communicating something entirely different. Nonverbal awareness gives us an opportunity to become more intentional about whether our behavior supports the message that we're trying to communicate. In Christian communication, where relationships, trust, compassion, and connection are so important, that awareness can be a meaningful difference for those in front of us. So ultimately, my research supports the idea that nonverbal communication plays a crucial role in how we understand messages, communicate emotion, and build relationships. Participants consistently recognize the importance of body language, tone, voice, eye contact, facial expressions, and gestures. They associated these behaviors with trust, sincerity, emotional presence, engagement, and connection. So if there's one thing I hope you take away from this research, it's that the effective communication that we seek to deliver isn't only about choosing the right words, it is also about being fully present with the person in front of us. As communicators, leaders, and Christians, we have the opportunity every day to make people feel heard, valued, and understood. So becoming more aware of what is communicated without words is a small way that we can begin to be more intentional about how we connect with others. So my question to you as you leave this seminar is this: what are you communicating when you aren't speaking? Because we know a greater awareness of nonverbal communication fosters meaningful relationships, which we're all seeking in the work that we do. Thank you.